That plant right there with the monarch on it is called swamp milkweed. And it is a common wetland plant. And everybody in Fayetteville who is concerned about butterflies ought to know about that plant. And we have wiped it out with our zoning and our push and rush to development without even looking at any of the biological issues all over the place, including this 60 acres. And yet it's a common plant. It's state listed in Arkansas because we've done such a horrible job of managing for that plant right here. And I know it looks like one of those pretty pictures that you get in a fundraising mail, you know, but that is in fact the reality. So if monarch butterflies are declining, you can thank the decisions made in Fayetteville for development, because that's part of the problem. So I'm just going to tell you the way it is, and I don't mean anything personal toward anybody. So let's go to the next one. In the 1950s, in the middle 1950s here, we had flights of American golden plovers that involved thousands of birds. This is the bird that has the longest pattern of migration in the entire world. And we had thousands of them coming through here. Right there in that big loop where my friend Don Nelms built Landers Auto, and where we allowed the Sam's warehouse to be built right on top of a wetland. And we've allowed the church to push the crawdads and everything else up under red dirt. We have permitted that. And we've lost this entire flight. This doesn't occur in Fayetteville anymore. There's one place in Fayetteville where you can still see this flight, and it's very small, and that's at Woolsey Wet Prairie, because there's a little bit of protected habitat there. But this was seen by people who live in Fayetteville now. So let's go to the next one, American golden plover. This is what they look like in a big wet field that my friend Dan Cootie just calls a cow pasture, and I say that, he is my friend. But when he looks at a place like that, it just looks like a pasture to him. But in fact, it's a wetland, and it's full of Osage burrowing crayfish and all kinds of aquatic insects and all kinds of food that feed these birds in migration. And what I want to tell you is we have an obligation here, not just to developers, not just to other people on the city board, not just to engineers. We have an obligation to the world we live in, and we've given this up. Let's go to the next one. So what I did here, and please excuse my crude map making, this is obviously a Google map, but I just kind of outlined a little bit here of what we're talking about in terms of the loss of habitat. And this is just part of it, but I went up here to the 112, the area we're talking about now, and then I just swept down through here down toward Farmington. But that, every bit of that is, with a few small minor blocks, was built on seasonal wetlands. Every bit of it. Every bit of it was Osage burrowing crayfish habitat. Every bit of it was used by American golden plovers. Every bit of it had swamp milkweed on it. I mean, not every foot, but they were common on it.
And other species.
And lots of other species, which I'm going to show you in a minute here. But I just want you to see how big an area that we're talking about originally and what we've got left. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so a keystone species, like a species that has a connection to all other species in the habitat. Osage burrowing crayfish. It's a real common species in this area, but it only occurs in 9 counties because there's a lot of diversity among crayfish. And yet I hear from people like routinely, well, why is anybody concerned about that? Well, it's because this species is connected to many others that are as much part of our heritage here in Fayetteville as this city hall is, for example. This is part of our heritage. Let's go to the next. This is one of the burrows, which I heard from this recently. We fought for 3 years over that property that's around Wilson Springs, and we begged Dan Cootie, a committee, not to sell the city property there, protect it. And he said, oh, we can build houses on that, and they build them. Now, all those yards over there around there, and I hope I'm not offending anybody here, it's got a house over there by Wilson Springs, had these Osage burrowing crayfishes on there, and now they're accusing the Wilson Springs Conservation Area of causing flooding on their property. And we told the city, and we told the then city engineer, it all is hydric soil. That means that you could dig into the soil and you can see where the standing water has changed the soil profile. It's a common term. And in those hydric soils are Osage burrowing crayfish. No, Wilson Springs Conservation Area is not causing flooding in those neighborhoods around there. They have always flooded. Okay, next. And here it is. And of course they don't like it because they go out with their lawnmowers and hit these big clumps of clay. Well, sorry. They were there first. That's their habitat. And the city had a chance to protect that. 289 acres. And the mayor then was told by his own hand-picked committee who looked at it, don't develop the low part, the 220 acres. Don't build on it. It's hydric soil. Only build in the uplands. But, okay, let's go. Okay, here it is. This is a Osage burrowing crayfish carrying a bunch of young. This is out at Woolsey Wet Prairie. Lots of animals depend on this big creature, not to eat this big creature, though some do, but to eat those little ones. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, so first, if you don't know what hydric soil is, I thought I'd just put this up there because it's a real key point. The thing that really bothers me is it seems like that we have all these criteria for how we zone property. But we don't seem to have any rules. If it's hydric soil, that tells you it floods. When water collects on it, it floods. And this is a standard definition. If we have hydric soil, why are we building on it? Because everybody knows it's just elementary hydrology. This kind of property collects stormwater and it holds it and it slowly releases it into the water table. And that's why historically you had very few floods. And that's why as we build more of these areas, we put whatever we put on top of them, we have more flooding. Okay, let's go. There are lots of plants in there, and boy, would I wish that I had a couple hours to take you through the plant list. And I'm going to mention a couple things. This is a common one. But these places that just look like cow pastures when they're dry in August are covered with unusual and special plants. And I again would like to say that's part of our heritage here too. It's not just these nice buildings here and our square and our tradition of the Fayetteville Way. This is part of our heritage too. And this is part of what we give away. Okay, next. And this is Arkansas darter. Sorry, it's a terrible photograph. This was a fish that was trapped and they put them in these little plastic boxes and they get them all closed in so you can take snapshots of them. But this is the fish that is in Wilson Springs. It was found by Steve Wilson when he worked for the Highway Department and then went on to Arkansas Game and Fish. That he found in there, and by the way, it's been found not only now in Wilson Springs, but also in Clabber Creek and also in these feeder springs that are going to be impacted by all these developments in this area. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in just a second. But we are going to impact this if these developments are permitted to go ahead in the future. In other words, whatever zoning is done with that property, when they build on it, they're going to have direct impacts on this. So let's go to the next. This is a smallmouth salamander. Okay, hold up your hand if you know what smallmouth salamanders are. Okay, a few of you've heard of them. This is a species that is part of our tradition. We were not just Confederates and Yankees in the Civil War. We didn't just come over with wagons and settle here in the 1820s. We didn't just build this city hall. We didn't just have the University of Arkansas after the Civil War. We also have this. This is important, and we have to understand it now before we lose it. These are fairly common out at Woolsey Wet Prairie, the existing mitigation project that we have that has been so successful in protecting these species in that. And that's a city project. And if I'm proud of, well, I'm proud of a lot of things about living in Fayetteville, but one of the things I'm really proud of is that the city had enough sense that when we needed to build that west side treatment plant, which we did need to build, and when we built a very good plant, which was built out there people had the wisdom at that time, including Mayor Dan Cootie and the people who've come after him, to realize that we've got to mitigate properly for what we destroy. And as a result of that suitable mitigation that was done out there, in other words, we mitigated where we destroyed the property so that we could do our best job to protect the species that live there. One of them is smallmouth salamander. Okay, next. This was a total shock when it was found, Graham's crayfish snake. When this snake was found at Woolsey Wet Prairie, it had not been recorded. In Arkansas, not just northwest Arkansas, Arkansas for, Bruce, 50 years?
North Arkansas, 65 years. The rest of Arkansas, about 50 years.
Okay. For a half century, nobody had seen this snake. Now, what does that tell you about the world we live in? Because, listen, are you ready for this? Because the mitigation was done properly at Woolsey Wet Prairie, because the city had used common sense and preserved habitat in that area, they found this snake. Now, we could stay up here all night, and you probably don't want to, debating on whether or not that's a great thing that they found this snake. But I'm a biologist, and I care about ecosystem diversity, as I'm sure most of you, probably all of you do. And so this is a wonderful thing, and guess what? They found a lot of these snakes. Once they started finding them, they found a lot of them. And just to put in a little short plug here, because the city manages that property, and they've hired a consultant who's a biologist and actually understands what's going on about those species, we now know that about Graham's crayfish snake, where it is, and we're slowly learning more about its habitat requirements, and we know it's here in these wetlands. And the guy that found them, J.D. Wilson, up at U of A, I've asked him about some of these other wetland properties, and he said they're probably in all of them. But I ask everybody here to think about it. In this discussion that we just had about this 60 acres and the zoning, did you ever hear about Graham's crayfish snake? No, you didn't hear about it because nobody gives a damn. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm just going to say it the way it is. We go ahead and develop this property, we destroy these habitats, and we don't give a damn about these creatures or their future. We could. Fortunately, they saw fit at the Westside Treatment Plant to create a suitable mitigation site to protect the species that were in that area. And nobody knew that Graham's crayfish snake was there, but let's go to another picture here. Okay, here's crawfish toad. Anybody know about crawfish toads?
Mm-mm.
Okay, I'm telling you again, this is your heritage.
Crawfish toad. Is that what you said?
Crawfish toad.
Okay.
This is your heritage.
I'm gonna get it
Everything is
right.
named crayfish.
Well, I think it's crayfish. Yeah, and why is that? Oh, there's an interesting point. Why are they all called crayfish?
Because that's
Good
a
point.
key,
Remember the keystone species?
species.
Yeah, you remember that?
I was taking
Oh,
notes.
yeah, you're getting it. I appreciate that. This is part of your heritage. And this is a U of A graduate student. U of A, part of our heritage, out doing research. And that's what we need to be doing in these places before we allow them to be destroyed. We need to find this stuff out. Because if we find it out, there can still be mitigation that can help protect them. And that's what we've got to do. Okay, let's go to the next.
There he is.
Everybody know this bird? Yeah, it's a sora, thank you. It's a sora. It's a wetland bird. It likes these wetlands that look like pastures when they're wet, and they come through here in big numbers. But how many of you knew? You've heard all about the 60 acres, and you've heard all about this. How many of you knew that it had soras in it? I'm not trying to make, I want to be careful here. I spent my life studying this stuff, so that's why I know about it. But I'm trying to make a point here. We're playing cards with a bad deck when we agree to change these and allow these properties, special areas, to be developed and radically changed, and we have an empty deck. You don't know this bird? It's a common bird in that habitat. It's declining all over its range. Anybody got any idea about why it's declining?
Development.
Well, because they lose habitat. I mean, it goes back to habitat. Okay, next. Okay, here's a sedgerine. Another common bird in these wetlands. And let's go on. Anybody know this bird?
Yeah, it's what's
LeConte sparrow, it's okay. This is actually a LeConte sparrow. But this is a wetland sparrow. Okay, so does the city of Fayetteville, or do you, as members of the Environmental Action Committee, have any responsibility here for being concerned about LeConte sparrow? I mean, I'm just asking, is it your concern? I mean, who's responsible for this?
Everyone.
Was this,
Well, okay, I realize I'm asking a,
was this picture taken in the area that we're
well, this is
debating
at
about?
Woolsey Wet Prairie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the same kind of habitat, it's the same thing. Whose responsibility is this?
Everybody's.
Well, my point is that surely somewhere in this city, this vibrant city, with all the smart people that work in this city, and who work for the city, and who care about the future of the city, surely somewhere in there, they can talk about something besides engineering options for special properties. And I don't know what the answer to it is. But somebody's responsible for this. And it's not just bird watchers. Okay, let's go. And what about this one?
Oh, beautiful.
American bittern. There were at one point 5 of these. I saw 5 of these one day at Woolsey Wet Prairie. That Woolsey Wet Prairie has to be our reference here because anybody got a reason to know why we have to use Woolsey Wet Prairie as our reference for all these wetlands?
It's the best we've got.
Because it's the only place that's been studied. We've thrown away all the rest of them. And so we have to do it. That's our reference. And there's all kinds of data about it. It was a very smart move when the city created Woolsey Wet Prairie and managed it professionally and efficiently because it's the responsible thing to do. Whose responsibility is it to have American bitterns? Does anybody here feel that they are personally responsible for American bitterns?
Not
No.
at this point.
But generally, okay, I'm sorry. But generally I understand. But I'm just trying to get you to think about this because they want you to be responsible for knowing, is it C2, is it X4, is it CBX2? And who's going to build on it? And where's the damn street going to go? But what about the bitterns? And you can't do it. You can't go to the city board meeting and talk about that because nobody gives a damn. Because we've already decided before we even wade into this process that it doesn't count. The city of Fayetteville has no responsibility for American bitterns or Henslow sparrows or Graham's crayfish snake. It's not part of the process, except here. Okay, let's go to another one. Okay, here's Henslow sparrow. Now, just a little, I promised only 10 minutes of this. I did write a book called Birdside Baptist once. You can see why I might have had a religious theme on it. This is Henslow sparrow. We found Henslow sparrow at what's now Wilson Springs Conservation Area. And it is a big declining bird in North America, and it was a great find when we found it. We found it in 2 spots in Clabber Creek. One of them was in a wholly city-owned property. And we begged the mayor and the council at that time to not turn loose of that property until we had figured this out. But we lost that battle. And the then city engineer, who has gone on to something else, does not work for the city now, said, "Oh, don't worry, Joe, we're going to name the streets out there after those birds. So now we have Harrier Street, and we have Swallow Lane." Isn't that great? That was his idea of mitigation. And we were thinking about Henslow sparrows. Whose responsibility is it to deal with Henslow sparrows? Whose is it? If it's not ours, whose is it? Okay, let's go to another one. Bob White.
Oh, Bob.
You read the Arkansas Democrat Gazette? Oh,
Yes,
it's just been
Bob
eaten
White,
up in the last
yeah.
month or 2 with letters about Bob White. Guess what? Whose responsibility is it to save the Bob White?
It's ours.
Okay. When we started the Fayetteville Christmas bird count in 1961, my colleague Doug James started it in 1961, and I've been doing it since the late 70s. we would see 40 of these birds, loggerhead shrikes, on that count every winter inside the city limits of Fayetteville. Anybody got any idea how many we're seeing now? Anybody want to guess?
2.
None.
0, 1. We get one. There's applause from the 25 people that were out on the count that day. Oh, we dodged the bullet today. We've still got a shrike inside the city of Fayetteville. So whose responsibility is that? I mean, I know I keep asking the same question, but it's really the point I want to make here, and that is we have responsibilities here. And they're specific. These are not metaphorical, poetic things. They're very specific things. These are all creatures that are part of the earth that we live in. And they're part of what make it a rich, wonderful place to be. And it's their world too. It's not just ours. So we've gone from 40 to 1 in the very same area. We've been doing the count in the same places every year since 1961. We've gone from 40 to 1 if we're lucky. Anybody want to guess where the 1 is? Where are we finding the 1?
Wet Prairie.
Yes, Woolsey Wet Prairie strikes again. Okay. Everybody loves an owl, right, except a mouse.
And some small dogs.
You know where, and small dogs or cats, feral cats. Anybody have any idea where this photograph was taken?
Woolsey Wet Prairie.
Woolsey Wet Prairie, you know you can't go wrong with Woolsey Wet Prairie. And the reason is
Because we actually protected it.
we protected a pretty big city, and its wisdom bought 300 acres in there years ago, thinking about the West Side treatment plant. And these owls are still there, and they're still nesting on that property. Okay, let's go to another. Okay, this is data from Woolsey Wet Prairie. And I got it off of the website, Bruce Shackelford's website. Okay, when that property was acquired by the city, Dan Cootie told me when we were raising hell about what's now become Wilson Springs Conservation Area, and we did, went at it, you know, Dan is a card-carrying member of the Sierra Club, and he used to get that green membership card, wave it around up in the air, you know, and so we were battling out, duking it out, you know, it was fun but serious, you know, serious stuff. But he said, why don't you and Mike Mladenov go out there and crawl under that barbed wire fence out there where the sewer plant is now? And it's just like Wilson Springs. And you know why? We went out there and he was exactly right. He knew exactly what he was talking about. It was like that. At the time that land was acquired, and when they first went out there and started doing plant surveys, supposedly it was depauperate. It meant that, well, it had cattle on it, you know, and all the native plants were gone, so there just wasn't anything left. 47 species were identified out there. The most recent surveys that have been done out there, technical surveys, show 431 species, most of them native species.
We're at 450 now.
Okay, 450. And there's a really important point I want to make here, and this is for me, this is a really important point about mitigation. The problem with the mitigation that was done for that church property, well, there were a lot of problems with it, but the main problem is that we have no idea what we got for our mitigation. It's like buying a pig in a poke. How many of you want to buy a pig in a poke? Because we don't know what we got for it. We know for sure that nothing in the Clabber Creek watershed got saved because it wasn't done there. And we don't know anything about the species diversity where that mitigation went. We do know where it is, right in Fayetteville. And here's the evidence of it. We've had professional botanical surveys that have been done regularly at Woolsey Wet Prairie. We know what the native plant diversity is in that habitat. And that's the same habitat that we're talking about now in the 60 acres. It's just not really much difference in it. So I don't know if we'll get to 400 up there, but.
Is it appropriate to look at the map for a minute and ask a quick question?
Sure, I'm going to put a bunch of maps up there, maybe right now.
The prairie, the area that's being protected, I had a specific question.
About Woolsey?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, remember when we had the big ice storm? And there was an enormous amount of brush brought and piled and then shredded up?
Yeah.
Is that anywhere on part of that prairie? Is that
Yes,
applied?
yes, and we objected to it when it was done, but this was an emergency situation. And we objected to putting it on that because of the damage it did to that piece of property. But it was an emergency and things are done differently under that circumstance. And
If I can interrupt, Joe, I
Okay.
worked with David Juggins on that, and, because we had characterized all that property when we were looking for
I got 5.
a place
Yeah, okay.
to establish a wetland mitigation site. And so we had all the soil unit maps, and so where that big mountain, huge mountain of tree debris was brought in, we selected an area, it was a former prairie, but it was an area that did not have wetlands. So we did not want to fill wetlands with that huge mass of debris that was out there.
So how many years downstream are we from that? 5? How long ago was that?
2009.
2009.
Yeah. The good part about that is most of the dead trees were Bradford pears.
Oh, that's
That's the
good.
best part about it.
I've only got 5 minutes here, so I'm gonna run through this pretty fast to get done, because I know, okay. I know that you'll all wanna write down all these rare sedges, but these are kinda like all these other species we've been talking about that nobody ever heard of. Look at this. This is all part of your heritage too. And these are all in those habitats. And some of these are rare, like extremely rare, like they don't occur anywhere else. Okay, next one. And here's a few more. Big fancy plants, okay. Big fancy plants, big fancy plants, pollinators, milkweeds, okay. This is what, you know, if you use the slider on Google Earth, you can go to all these areas and you can look, see here's Van Ash, so you see where we are. So the new road's going across right there. This is a wetlands configuration, all of this right here. There are prairie mounds on here and wet areas in between, and some of these were, you can see how this was impounded, this one wetland. This right here is probably the head of Clabber Creek. That's probably the actual head of it. Now, my friend Don Nelms claims that it's right behind Landers Auto, but I think it's actually here because this goes here, eventually goes behind Landers. Okay, go on. And I wanted to show in here just very quickly, this is what was covered under 3 feet of red dirt and gravel. This right here, this is the piece that they're going to build a church on. The city has permitted, on top of this wetland, an 800-car parking lot. So this was the treatment that this property got. And I'm not saying it personally, I'm just saying, let's just take a look at this good and hard. The city allowed this wetland habitat. And see this right here? This is probably was ditched out at some point. I don't know when. And that gravel and that red dirt and all that gravel has been dumped right to the edge of this thing. So much for protection of the wetlands and all the species that need it. Okay, let's go to the next one. You can see right here, okay, this is the area that we're talking about, okay? The 60 acres is right here. And this is where Van Ash has been put across. Every bit of this going across here, including in here, are seasonal wetlands. It's one ecosystem unit. It's not 20 acres here and 15 acres here. It's one unit. It has all these species in it, probably. But by the way, somebody's going to have to look at it before it's permitted to be destroyed. And when we permitted Van Ash to be across here, the winter before, the pond that was destroyed doing Van Ash was the winter residence of 3 trumpeter swans. Okay, I understand everybody's ever driven on old Van Ash, got tired of that damn road, it didn't connect good anymore, it didn't fit our modern city vision. But whose responsibility is it to recover trumpeter swans? I just ask you that. Whose responsibility is it? Oh, it's not ours, not in our green city. We need our roads. We don't need habitat for trumpeter swans, because that's the truth of it. Now, I understand there's practicalities here. I'm not an impractical person, not completely. But, you know, this is a question you have to ask. It's not good enough to sit in front of AETN at night and watch nature programs and say, oh gosh, I hope the trumpeter swans don't go extinct. Somebody's got to take responsibility somewhere. And what did we do? Well, we're about to open up a boulevard with a nice trail along it. Isn't that great? Without trumpeter swans. Okay, next. I'm just showing here. Here's the pond that no longer exists that had the trumpeter swans, but we have our fine new street going in there, and which I'll drive on, by the way. You know, I'm shameless. And I just put this red line in here to show you where this water is flowing through this area. I just want to show you how this is connected.
Is it named Trumpet or Swan?
Trumpeter swan, because
Is
they.
it named
Trumpeter.
the street? Is it going to be named?
Well, you could introduce that in the board if you want, but the people that did that at Wilson Springs are gone. So we voted against them. But that red line
Thanks for
shows.
that
You're welcome. That red line right there, that red line there is the drainage. And all of this, the drive-in, all this behind truckers, goes right into Wilson Springs Conservation Area. The point I'm trying to make, and what I want you to see here, is that it is foolish to look at 60 acres in this area in here and think that we can make one decision here and one decision there without, in fact, destroying the whole. Let's go to the next. So what this system really is, there's a whole group of them here. Here's what's left of that Van Ash wetland. Here's 112 Drive-In. That's all a wetland. Here's where the rezoning is proposed. Here's an area over here. And well, look, here's the Night Heron Drive. I know you wanted to see that. And here's Wilson Springs Conservation Area. What I want you to think about then is try to think holistically. I've heard this a lot over the years in my 50 years in Fayetteville, or 40 or whatever it is now. Oh, we're going to think holistically about things. Well, let's think holistically about these seasonal wetlands for once. Okay, next. I think that's it. Thank you very much. I grew up as a Southern Baptist. I know you'll all be shocked to hear that.
I did too, and it felt like I was right back there.
Go.
I'm really sorry about that.
Joe, can you go back one picture?
Yeah, if you go back to that last.
Well, you have to talk to this guy because I was trying to
Yes,
stay
we'll
inside.
let Joe go right back there.
Joe, I have a question.
I want to see that.
I've always wondered, where is the source?
Right there, you were
Right
on
there.
it.
Where's the source of the water that comes under here? Out in the middle of this.
And when they reconfigure that, the highway department will be good, and I know the city will be good about watching out for that. But yeah, it's right there.
That used to be the place where I got off the bicycle and went down and had a cold splash.
Yeah.
It was brutally cold. Just right for an August afternoon.
Oh, I just realized there was just one last thing I just wanted to say, and then that's really all I have to say unless you just want me to answer questions. The thing I really would like to leave you, the take-home message besides whose responsibility is it, that I'd like to leave is that mitigation is going to be really important in this, because I've been here too long to think that a lot of this stuff is not going to get built eventually. I see what's happening out there, and I'm not foolish. What may still be in our hands is how we mitigate it. And I would like to argue that the mitigation that was done for that church property is ineffective in terms of the species that are involved. What we need to do is look at some other options. And if I had my choice in this matter, I would say the city would just refuse. Well, I guess I hope that Alice Walton would give me $1 billion and I could go buy all this property. That would be my first choice, but since I don't think that's going to happen, I would like to see the city go ahead with plans that were set up several years ago to create additional wetlands connected to Woolsey Wet Prairie, because we now have good scientific data on Woolsey Wet Prairie that shows that that is working in terms of the species of plants and animals. And I don't think there's any other way to mitigate it. The second option would be to find a way to mitigate, to connect up here with Wilson Springs, because there are Arkansas darters in this spring run. This is one of the spring runs. See, this is all spring run. See, it starts up here and goes down. And so a second option for mitigation would be to find a way, and I don't know what the legal options are here, to find a way that as we make decisions about all this stuff in here, about allowing development, that we try to create the mitigation so that it increases the security of what's going on at Wilson Springs Conservation Area. That would be a good programmatic way. And the other thing is really kind of piecemeal. You could go for each piece, each parcel here. You know, 112 drive-in is not gonna stay a drive-in. You know, I'm pretty sure pretty soon we'll see something different there. That, as that happens, each of these things need real mitigation, not just there's one Army Corps of Engineers guy for 9 counties who has to look at every single thing, and it doesn't work. The city of Fayetteville needs to get proactive about mitigating the loss of wetlands. And so there are different options. The best one I really think is the one that's got the best science behind it, which is expand Woolsey Wet Prairie on the city property. We already own the property. It's suitable for wetlands mitigation. And if we have to mitigate across here to make up for these losses, let's go to Woolsey Wet Prairie, let's add acres to that project, and let's build the populations of the species that are successful there. But my understanding is that there's some barrier to doing that, and I don't know what that barrier is. Or maybe it's just inertia, I don't really know what it is. But let's do it!
Woo!
That way we can take a little responsibility here.